And I can't believe we're on to the 12th show now. And I don't think I mentioned Vince Russo. I think I may have said his name maybe once or twice, but I've never really gone into any great length talking about Vince Russo. And I thought now is the right time to have a bit of a Vince Russo rant. For those who don't know who he is, it was in the early 90s that he started doing a radio show in New York called Vicious Vincent's World of Wrestling. He sent a letter off to Linda McMahon to try and get a job in the WWF, and he ended up becoming the editor of the WWF magazine. Now, at some point in about, I guess, 97, I think it may have been, at some point in 97, when Raw was getting annihilated by Nitro in the ratings, Vince McMahon called a meeting in his office, and Vince Russo was called in as well. And when he walked in, all of the current writing team were sat there, and Vince comes in and he throws the WWF magazine on the table. And at this point the magazine was becoming very edgy. They were mentioning WCW in the magazine, which was unheard of at this time. It was unheard of for WWE, for WWF to mention WCW or vice versa. I mean, ECW was doing it. ECW would mention other organisations, and I think in many ways ECW had more to do with the WWF changing direction and becoming a more edgier product. But if you believe Vince Russo, it was because of the WWF magazine taking a more edgy direction and having, centerfold pictures of Sable and Sunny and this kind of thing, that made Vince McMahon decide that Vince Russo was the guy to turn things around for the company. So Vince Russo became the head writer for the WWF, and in 1998 Ed Ferrara came on board. Ed Ferrara had been a TV writer. He worked on such great TV shows as Weird Science and Honey, I Shrunk the Kids, the TV versions of them, which of course everyone remembers. But anyway, Ed Ferrara came on board, and according to him and Russo, they were the main writers. They were responsible for everything we saw, and they helped turn the company around. And WCW, the higher-ups in WCW, believed that, and they hired them in October of 99. Vince Russo and Ed Ferrara had not been working under a contract, so they jumped ship to WCW, and they sold everyone on the idea they were going to come in and save the company. Now, I don't believe for a second that Vince Russo is to blame. Vince Russo and Ed Ferrara are to blame for WCW going under. I think it was pretty much dead and buried by the time they got there. But what they did was they just, it was in the grave, and they basically came along and shoveled a bit more dirt onto the grave. That's what Russo and Ferrara's contribution to WCW was. It was just absolutely horrendous programming. I mean, even prior to them coming in, it was bad. But after they came in, it got even worse. To the point you had Medusa as the Cruiserweight champion, and Ed Ferrara himself won the Cruiserweight title, having played the character of Oklahoma, which was a parody of Vince, a parody of JR, who has been suffering from Bell's palsy. Ed Ferrara went out there and mocked JR and his medical condition, which I'm not going to rag on too much because Vince McMahon himself has done the same thing, which is also despicable. So the product really went downhill even further. Of course, David Arquette won the WCW title. Russo himself won the WCW title. And so you got to see firsthand what Vince Russo and Ed Ferrara's writing looks like when you haven't got Vince McMahon there filtering everything. Because believe me, I'm not going to say Russo never had a good idea. I mean, Bret Hart came out and said Vince Russo's never had a good idea in his life. Clearly, I mean, he must have done some good stuff in the WWF, because Vince McMahon is no fool. I mean, he's not going to have someone like Russo writing the product if he was completely clueless. But clearly, Russo had a lot of help. I mean, he wasn't the only one writing the product. Jim Cornette was very much a part of the writing team. I'm not sure if Michael Hayes was at the time, but certainly there was a lot of great writers around. I'm not sure if Brian Gewirtz was there by that point, but I think he may have been. So I don't believe for a second that Russo and Ferrara wrote every single show all by themselves. And when SmackDown came along, it doubled their workload, and they were writing both Raw and SmackDown each week. They got burned out, and they went to WCW. I mean, you could say WCW was bad anyway, and you can't blame Russo for what happened there, and you can't, because it had already gone downhill. But Russo then went on to write for TNA as well, and you just saw more evidence of what Vince Russo's rubbish booking looks like in TNA. So now that he's gone, hopefully this means that TNA will be able to turn the corner. I think they have got a great writer with Bruce Pritchard writing the shows, but I just think that Hogan and Bischoff have too much to say in what's going on, and I think until Hogan and Bischoff are gone, I don't think TNA can really turn the corner properly, if you see what I mean. I think that as long as Hogan and Bischoff are around, the product is still going to stink, because they're the same individuals involved in WCW, and I just keep seeing evidence of the same thing happening to TNA that happened to WCW. With all these great talents, you can look at WCW towards the end, and even when Russo came in, they still had a very strong roster of guys with Benoit, who I'm not supposed to mention, Guerrero, Eddie Guerrero, Rey Mysterio, Booker T, Dean Malenko, all these guys they had under their roster in WCW, and they all went on and became big stars in the WWF. Jericho, of course, who had just left prior to Russo coming in, but Jericho had been there as well, and of course he went on and became such a huge star. And I would love to think that it's going to be the same thing in TNA, that as soon as AJ Styles or Samoa Joe or Bobby Roode or Austin Aries, James Storm, any of these guys, Christopher Daniels, as soon as any of these guys go to WWE, they're going to become stars. But I just fear that if they do go to WWE, they'll just become another Tyson Kidd or another, Kofi Kingston or another Alex Riley or Zack Ryder, any number of guys that WWE has under their roster that they too don't know what to do with. So WWE and TNA, to me, are both sort of very much mirroring WCW in its later days, when you had Nash and Hogan and Sting and all these guys at the top in WCW. It needed to move on. And Eric Bischoff, who, yes, I mean, the NWO was a great angle, and he got so much mileage out of it, but really, what else did Eric Bischoff contribute to the wrestling business? He had one good idea. That, yes, I mean, WCW went on and it defeated WWF in the ratings for weeks and weeks and weeks. You can't take that away from Bischoff. But really, that one idea took him as far as it could possibly go. And what else has he done? I mean, he's a good character. I think he's a good heel, mainly because I don't think he really needs to act all that much when he's playing a heel, because I think the character he portrays is very much similar to how he is in real life anyway. But no, I mean, Bischoff and Hogan, they need to go away. They really do. And until they do, I can't see TNA, as Bret Hart said in that interview, TNA is going nowhere. Absolutely nowhere. This Aces and Eights angle is getting better, as I said, with Bully Ray. They finally got somewhat of a star in Bully Ray. But isn't this whole Aces and Eights angle really starting to mirror the NWO? It seems that Bischoff just can't all he can do is sort of try and recreate the NWO all the time. They did it with the Millionaires Club in WCW. They did it with what was that group called, with Angle and Nash and Steiner? What were they called when they had that group? I can't remember what they were called now. The Mafia, main event Mafia. That's it. They keep having these groups come into TNA, and Aces and Eights is the latest in a long line. But this one is even more like the NWO, because you've got the actual talent in the company turning. And believe me, with Bully Ray as the champion and now the head of Aces and Eights, come on, who doesn't look at that and go, Hogan as champion in the NWO? Come on, I mean, they're just going down that road again, aren't they? And you've got Taz on commentary, who's another member of Aces and Eights. It's almost like an invasion angle, isn't it?